someday it's going to be okay, and someday it's going to make sense, and someday this pain will go away. It
Yes.
will.
Welcome to Breakups, Broken Hearts, and Moving On with Janice Formicella. I'm Janice Formicella, a breakup coach passionate about supporting others to learn from their breakups, overcome loneliness, love being single, and see the end of a relationship as the beginning of a magical, sexy new chapter in life. I am here each week to share with you the tools that I have learned through my own painful breakups, through hitting rock bottom more than once, and through working with people all around the world to heal their broken hearts. If you are looking for hope and strength to move on from your breakup and resources to enjoy your new life, you are in the right place, and I've got your back. Welcome, everybody, to another episode, Breakups, Broken Hearts, and Moving On. Today, I have a guest. I don't have guests all the time. Welcome to the show, Soha Al-Jurf, founder of Voice Coaching for Creatives. Today, we are going to talk about finding your voice after or during a breakup, and perhaps after a relationship that left you feeling as though you had perhaps lost a part of yourself, hadn't used your voice in a long time, and would like to reclaim that part of you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure. I hadn't thought about doing this topic before, and as soon as you suggested it, it just made so much sense to me. And in fact, I felt even a little moved. And I think that this is going to be a great conversation and help a lot of people. You feel so stifled after a bad relationship, and all of the trauma of a breakup can really leave you feeling stunted. I would really like to know. I know that you work with opera singers, which absolutely fascinated me. And I actually want to talk a bit about that because I'm an opera buff. I don't think people know that. So please let me know what it is that you do. This is so interesting that you coach opera singers, and how exactly you got to the point of thinking that your work could overlap with people who want to rediscover themselves after a breakup.
I have a degree in opera. My bachelor's degree is in opera. And then I had a bit of a voice problem myself in my singing voice. And so I went to seek help. I went to an ear, nose, and throat clinic to get my voice examined. And I really felt like the person who did the examining and the person who was supposed to help me rehabilitate she wasn't a singer herself, and she didn't really understand that my identity was very much entwined with my singing voice.
Oh, sure.
And so when they couldn't find anything wrong with my voice, and so the idea that my voice wasn't functioning, but I didn't quite know how to fix it, and they didn't really get that this could mean not only a change in my career or a loss of my career, but a total loss of my identity, sort of catapulted me into deciding that instead of going on to get my master's degree in opera, I decided to get my master's degree in speech pathology. So I ended up going to a program at the University of Iowa that specializes in voice. So they have this vocology program. And so I just kind of lucked out. I grew up in Iowa, and I just kind of went home to figure out what to do after undergrad, and was like, okay, you know what? I really want to learn the science of this. I want to learn how this all works. So did that, got into that, and I got into that profession. I got into speech pathology clinical work with this idea in mind that I had suffered sort of a deep existential pain from not only losing my voice or feeling like I'd lost my voice, but also going to seek help and having somebody not understand the depth of what it really means to lose your voice, not just as an opera singer, but anybody who feels that they have voice loss. It's a tremendous psychological burden. It's very, very difficult to grapple with the sense that you've lost your voice. So I wanted to help others who were in a similar position not ever have to go through that alone. I wanted to make sure that people who were struggling in the same way I had support.
When you say that you lost your voice, were you just not able to sing fully as an opera singer anymore?
There are a lot of things that can affect the voice. So now you mentioned I work with opera singers. I've left my clinical work to pursue this other voice coaching for creatives work that I've created over the last 10 years, really, but specifically over the last 4 or 5. So when I left my clinical work, I started working exclusively with opera singers who have vocal injuries to rehabilitate them and get them back on stage. So that's exclusively what I've been doing for the last 10 years for my income while I set up this next practice and this next coaching program. So with my voice just started to crack, and it was random, it was arbitrary. And when you're singing, other genres of music, it may not matter as much. But when you're singing opera, the assumption is sort of this ideal of perfection. And so I had lost the sort of core essence of perfection. The voice was still beautiful. It was still doing great things that it needed to do. It was still developing, but it had this kind of fatal flaw. And without being able to fix the fatal flaw or even find a medical reason for it, I was stuck. And so there wasn't really anything that I could do, except at that time I had to stop singing.
What you said about losing your identity definitely made me think of my divorce. I guess we are talking about breakups already. Had my entire identity really tied up in the fact that I was married, and that kind of like I was, because I was a wife, but more because of the relationship itself and how people saw us as kind of this power couple, and how people looked up to us and using the we pronoun all of the time, which wow. And yes, when I finally decided I needed to walk away, I totally didn't know who I was, which we'll talk about today, how you can lose your identity after losing a relationship. And you don't even realize sometimes how much of your self-worth and like I keep on saying, self-identity can be tied up in a relationship, especially when it's long term, and also how quickly we can find ourselves there. And I can say, as far as people not understanding, I definitely also went through that. Like I don't even think my divorce attorney understood how much I was losing it. She just had no sensitivity to it whatsoever. Neither did my family. So many people around me just couldn't understand, after having been bad for so long, how I could still felt like I lost such a big part of myself. So I really look forward to, maybe speaking a little bit about the correlation between voice and identity. I am so fascinated that you work with opera singers, and we won't spend too much time talking about this, but I must have watched at least a dozen just this year. I'm really, really into it. And I haven't really talked about it on this podcast before. I've watched Bluebeard's Castle, La Funicella de West, The Exterminating Angel. That was a good one. Puccini's Tosca, La Varza del Destino, Dead Man Walking, and of course, The Hours.
Wow, that's quite a selection. Very, very varied, all the way across the board. That's amazing. There's some really amazing operas in there.
I wrote down the ones that I could remember. Actually, my best friend and I watched them together, and we sat down and made a list, and we couldn't even remember them all. So that's just this year. And I'm a really big fan of it. So I'm really excited to connect with you. And I actually texted him multiple times saying that I was going to be doing this, and he found it fascinating as well. I am maybe embarrassed to say I didn't even know you could major in opera as your bachelor's. I never really thought about it.
The degree is in voice performance, but you specialize there are certain programs that specialize in opera programs.
Very cool. I'm so excited to know you. One thing I've always wanted, and then we won't talk about this anymore. How did you discover that you can sing opera? It's just such a unique thing to do, and you have to be so loud. I've always wondered, at what point does someone realize that they're able to do that?
Yeah, I don't know. I always, many singers who sing opera, myself included, kind of pinpoint our origin story to having seen The Sound of Music and trying to imitate Julie Andrews.
Oh,
and so I think
beautiful.
I think that's sort of the starting point for a lot of us, is that we saw The Sound of Music and we learned the music and we started singing along, and then we wanted to have her voice. And then I think it just grew from there. My father, interestingly, also was a big opera buff. So I grew up listening to opera. It was always playing on his stereo. And so I think it was just very natural for me to try to imitate those voices that I was hearing.
That must have been a lovely thing to have in the background as a child. I hope it
It was
was. That
powerful,
sounds,
sure.
yeah, I have to say my outlook on art and creativity and music has changed as a result of my friend Nate getting me into opera. And I am very, very, very thankful. I almost felt a little emotional that he kind of took it upon himself to introduce me to something that was so important to him. And then now we share it. But sadly, we're not here to talk about opera. Maybe we can do a fun episode just on that. I would like to know throughout when did you get to the point where you discovered this can help people recovering from breakups or a bad relationship?
So, what happened in terms of the work that I'm doing now and how that evolved is that one of my opera singers actually came to me and she was going through a breakup. And she came to me because I'm her mentor, and she had been talking to therapists forever, for years and years and years. And as with many people who go through a breakup, she found that she was kind of going through the same pattern over and over again. But as much therapy as she went through, she couldn't get herself out of it. And I had just finished my degree in psychology and Jungian psychology, in archetypal psychology and Jungian psychology. And so I was experimenting. I had been doing clinical work in voice for 20 years, and there was always a psychological, spiritual component. And because it was always one-on-one and people just kind of coming into my sphere, and people were telling me I was better than their marriage counselor, human relationships, human relationships and how they intertwine with the voice has always been part of my work. Just because people feel silenced, people feel they don't know how to communicate, etc. So as a speech pathologist and as somebody who was working in voice clinically, people would come to me because they had lost their voices. You don't ever really lose a voice literally, but that's the other fascinating piece that ties in with identity. Why does the sound quality of my voice why do I associate that with who I am? I do. And so if the sound quality coming out of my voice becomes hoarse or rough or affected in some way or weak, then I no longer feel like myself. The moment my voice comes out of my mouth, I don't feel like myself speaking. So people then would come in with voice issues, but they were coming in with all sorts of issues that tied into their voices. So just because of who I am and how I operate and my interest in psychology and spirituality and the soul, I was often in discussions with people about the whole dynamic of their lives. So often we went to their marriages, their work, their setup in life, what was working, what wasn't, because it all ties into the voice. So eventually I decided to leave my clinical work in voice to focus more on the psychological and the spiritual aspects. And as I was doing so, I'd finished my second master's degree in psychology. And one of my opera students came to me and was like, "Can I talk to you? I'm going through this breakup." And she and I had known each other for 10 years, 15 maybe. And I had helped her rehabilitate her voice, and we had gone through all of that together. And so we had a very close relationship. As she was going through this breakup, I was like, you know what? I've known you for 10 years, and this is the same story you keep coming back to me with every 6 months to a year. What do you think? How would you feel about me recording us talking about this and then just listening to you talk about this so that I can kind of intuitively play with it and see if there's another approach we can take other than talk therapy, other than a linear narrative of you just telling your story? Let's see if there's another way to get at this that might go deeper into your healing of this really deep wound that we all carry that gets triggered when we go through a breakup.
Wow. And what happened?
So she told me the story of her breakup, and it was like many stories of many of our breakups, right? So I trusted him. He'd been lying to me. I lost myself. I ended up stalking him. Like I found myself out in the street in my car watching to see.
Baby.
Yeah, to find that indeed women were leaving his apartment. Like I was right. He was lying. He was cheating. And as she kind of went through this narrative, I was listening to her, to the energy in her voice, because I've listened to her voice for 10 or 15 years. So the idea that in voice, in singing, there's a voice that's coming out, but that voice is somehow inauthentic or not in alignment with your heart, soul, body in a way that you're pushing through it in a way that causes damage. So I thought, well, if that's true of how voices get injured in opera, like let's say an opera singer comes to me, she has a vocal injury, and I'm there to help her heal it, I'm going to look at the patterns that have led her up to this moment, and I'm going to ask her, okay, where's your psychology at? Where's your mindset? Where's your technique? Yes, but how might you be pushing in a way to prove yourself, to sing louder than your instrument really is capable of? How are you out of alignment with who you really are and who I know you to be? because I know the core essence of your goodness, your authenticity. So if I can see that as your coach or mentor and you're not necessarily seeing it, and then you're pushing the voice out through somebody else's idea of who you should be, then you're damaging the voice. So might that also be true in our psychology? And so can I apply it to this breakup? So I recorded her talking about this breakup, and I was listening to her talk, and it was like there were sections that were kind of on a loop. And it wasn't just that the words were on a loop, her voice patterns were on a loop. So as she was telling the story, it was, yeah, and then this happened, and then this happened, and there was a pattern to the voice that felt not insincere, but a bit rehearsed. Like she's told the story over and over again, and she's telling it from her mind, but there's nothing emotionally happening or transitioning or shifting while she's doing it. But then she'd have these moments where she was like, but I know that I'm really my truest self when I'm salsa dancing. And then all of a sudden, this completely empowered voice would come through. It was different in rate. It was different in energy, in power, in pressure, in the pacing, in the length of vowels. Like everything sounded different. It wasn't just the words she was saying. Because if I was her therapist and I heard her say the words, I'm really myself when I'm salsa dancing, that might go by me. But the fact that her voice had changed, and I was like, wait a minute, just like when I'm working with your opera voice, your core, essential, authentic voice just came through there. Let's grab that, focus on it, pull it out. Tell me more about that. And so we started working from there. And what I did was I took those moments, I recorded her voice and I put it into GarageBand, and I started cutting up that sound sample of her speech, of her talking, of her narrative, and rearranging it so that she could start to hear her voice in the same empowered way that I was hearing it, with scripts that were going on and on about the breakup, but then these moments of, but this is who I really am coming through. And so then the work became, okay, can you listen to this? And can you hear, as I hear, that there's this spinning going on, but then underneath, there's actually this super empowered core essence of you. Let's draw that out. How do we do that?
Oh, this is so beautiful. I'm glad that she was able to hear that maybe for the first time. As far as the parts of her story that you found either rehearsed or repetitive, were they directly related to the breakup always? And why do you think that those specifically were the parts where she wasn't empowered? Like maybe had she not taken ownership over her story? Was she exhausted from it? What do you think that was about or is about?
I think all of the above, but I think like you were saying in terms of your own experience with your breakup or breakups in your history, society has a lot of support for the couple. And I recognize this as somebody. I've never been married. I've been in and out of partnerships and in and out of breakups my whole life, my whole adult life, but I've never been married. And that, like, living as a single person in this world is tough. And there's not a lot of support for it. And in fact, there can be a lot of judgment about it. And I think single women, especially single empowered women who have a voice, are seen as dangerous. And I think there's a lot of support for shutting women down when they are single and free and feeling good about it. And there's a lot of pressure to get back into couplehood. So I think we have a really, really deep cultural societal wound that tells us that if we have a breakup, if we're separated from the couple, there's something deeply inherently wrong with us. And I think that breakups trigger a very, very, very core source wound in us, that we've been separated from the tribe, that we're not good enough. So much of our culture as we're growing up as little people, so much of our culture is directed at, who are you going to marry? How many kids are you going to have? What's your house going to, like, what is your heteronormative dream world going to look like? And those of us who aren't within the heteronormative world, for example, we go through relationship after relationship and we're working perhaps through our trauma, which I think is often what we're doing in relationships. If we're working through our trauma in couplehood, in relationship, which is naturally often where it comes out, then I think what happens is, in her case, for example, those of us who aren't triggered by that particular trauma, so those of us who don't have in our structure, in our psychic structure, the lying, the cheating, the stalking, that's a particular trauma. And so because it's triggerable in her, she didn't simply walk away and say, you're no good for me, I'm done. because it's triggerable in her, and that he hit a very deep wound in her that had a little bit to do with him, but was mostly triggering a much deeper wound. Mm-hmm. When she separated from that, she was left alone with this wound. And ideally, in our partnerships, either we heal those wounds before we get into them, or we partner with somebody who's going to heal them, not trigger them. That's our ideal. But in her instance, she had accidentally, or because that's how we're wired, is to keep seeking out the thing that's going to heal us, but actually can further traumatize us. She had just, again, picked someone who was going to trigger her trauma rather than help her heal it. So I think she was in a trauma vortex.
And I definitely want to speak a little bit more about patterns and how we can uncover them. But first, as far as losing your voice during a relationship or a breakup, you just indicated that it does have a lot to do with trauma and wounds and those being opened up and not healed. Is that perhaps the biggest reason why people lose their voice in a relationship, or are there some other big causes or reasons that you've seen where people completely lose themselves, their voice, even their self-identity, and find themselves get really completely out of touch with who they really are?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think like we're saying, I think there's a lot of support for being in a couple. And I think that there's a lot of normalizing being in a couple and abnormalizing not. And so, yeah, I think that when people finally get into a couple, there's this idea that, well, I have to make this work, and that relationships are work, and that I'm good and I'm succeeding if the relationship works, and I'm bad and I'm shameful if the relationship doesn't work. So if I'm not with a partner with whom I communicate well and who is a good match in the sense that we are openly communicating, I really, really love you, meaning I see who you are, I want to help support and grow who you are, and you do the same for me, then I think, yeah, we're functioning from our habituated scripts, whether it's the scripts that we saw from our parents or whatever it is. And I think the tendency to shut down our authentic voice can be very rapidly and very deeply, because to have a voice, if that voice is in opposition to the other person's voice, then we have a conflict. And is that conflict resolvable? If I really am authentically myself and I bring my full self to this relationship, and you are authentically yourself, and those two don't match, then we're going to have to separate. And there's not, or we can't, if we can't work it out, if they're not already in sync and we can't work it out, we're going to have to separate. There's no support for that in our culture. So the pressure to stay in a relationship at whatever cost is very, very high. So for many of us, the first thing we're going to do, if we're capable of it, is we're going to silence ourselves. Or, I mean, depending on how toxic the relationship might be, we're going to be silenced. I think most people are silencing themselves because they don't want to have to leave the relationship. So
I hear that.
Yeah. So in the case of this young woman I'm talking about, she now describes herself as having felt like she was being gaslighted, because she would speak her truth, but then he would find a way to manipulate it so that her truth didn't make any sense to her anymore, because it wasn't in alignment with his truth. And so I think that can happen as well. Like I think we go in oftentimes knowing ourselves, having our voice in full force, and then in micro or macro ways, getting it systematically shut down because because it's a power dynamic, the other person doesn't agree, and we're afraid to leave the relationship.
I like that you have this background in psychology as well. One relationship dynamic that I've been interested in for a long time is that of enmeshment. And I also think that perhaps this would be what you might consider one of the micro reasons why people lose their voice. And that is wanting so much to be in a relationship, finding out that it feels really good to be around this person, becoming, before you know it, more or less dependent on the person. And also, before you know it, becoming some sort of unit, like this we that I talked about earlier, and how so many people, and I have to say, I probably have seen it more in women with what you were just saying about the power dynamic in enmeshed relationships, where you don't even recognize the person. You don't see her doing her hobbies. You don't see her going out on her own. She's happy with her partner because it feels so good to be around them. But before you know it, merging into to each other's lives and each other's personalities, and then therefore losing your voice because you gave up so much to become either exclusive or serious with the person because it felt good in the moment. And that can, I think, be really hard to get out of too. And also to not see how unhealthy it is because you've got the hormones going like crazy. But then just like day by day by day, you become less of who you were.
Yeah, and that enmeshment to some degree is a biologically, psychologically normal process.
Okay.
That enmeshment, so we come as separate beings. There's a core part of us that wants to connect, that wants to enmesh, that wants to feel like we did in the womb, that wants to feel like we did when we first came out of the womb and we were held all the time. There's a core part of us that needs or wants that enmeshment. But in a healthy adult relationship, you come in as two separate individuals, you make this mixy soup, and then at some point you have to separate out of the soup again. Mm-hmm. And then you have to look at each other as two individuals again and say, okay, we enmeshed, and now we got to slowly figure out what stays interconnected and then what has to separate again. And it's often in that people find that they run into trouble. Because, yep. And it's just because we are designed to enmesh and then we're designed that way. We're supposed to do that. It's a very human, tribal, ancestral thing to enmesh. Mm-hmm. That part's not abnormal. The problem comes when it's time to then separate ourselves again and look at each other and say, oh, wait a minute, you're not me. You're your whole other person, and you have wonderful. A voice, which should be wonderful.
Which should be, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Unless you've chosen the person based on your past trauma and projections.
Oh, goosebumps.
Yeah. So some psychologists argue you kind of can't avoid choosing somebody out of your trauma and projections. Okay. That all relationships begin in projection.
I'm writing this down, girl. I'm in a relationship that I consider to be quite healthy. In fact, he might walk in at any point. And so, but we've only been together a year. And so I'm enjoying kind of, going back and looking at, what attracted me to him and how well things have gone so far and all of the reasons. So yeah, that's why I've got my pin here. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna think about what my projection would have been. I actually had this experience as far as enmeshment and then trying to pull apart and realizing I couldn't. I used to live overseas. My last year living there, I basically fell in love with one of my close friends, and we spent a lot of time together. We had a bunch of friends in common. We just felt so good being with him. It was like, whoa, how is he there this whole time? And now we're in love. And I'm so glad that we finally got together. And we spent every moment together. I mean, probably from like the first time we even kissed, we started hanging out the next day. It was almost obsessive. I mean, picking me up from work, dinner every night, sleeping over, all of the things. And at the time, I'm just like feeling the feel goods like crazy. Oh my God, I was so happy. I thought I was in love with him. I still think I was, but and then he got an opportunity to go overseas for a job, and we were gonna keep it together, do long distance. I was gonna go and visit him. And almost as soon as he went overseas, it started being a little different. And then as soon as I went to visit him, it had already completely fallen apart because we had not really kept up the enmeshment. And then when we had tried to go and support each other doing completely different things, I think we found that we didn't even have as much in common as we thought we could. And there was really no going the other direction. It fell apart like really, really quickly. So I know that we're not here to talk about enmeshment, but I would really encourage people to keep an eye on that, because also when you don't have time in between seeing each other, you don't get the chance to think about what's happening and maybe either red flags or how healthy is it actually, because the person's around you all the time. And so you don't have time to process and reflect. So just a little side tangent.
I think that's hard though, because I think you can look at any relationship. Any relationship can take any course and any trajectory. Okay. And you really only know if the course and trajectory was healthy if you end up at a point later that you can say, this made sense to me. So whether the relationship is permanent or temporary, or how, whether it lasts till death or whether it doesn't, all relationships begin essentially in that state of projection and enmeshment. You kind of can't get around it. They will feel slightly differently. All I'm saying is that I think that what happens when we go to a therapist oftentimes is the therapist's like, well, of course, there are the warning signs, but I can come up with 100 couples who met exactly like you met, have the exact same story, and lived so-called happily ever after. They're 30, 40, 50 years into it, still madly in love. They met, I mean, I just met a couple over the weekend at a holiday party, and I was like, how'd you guys meet? Because I'm always fascinated by people's relationships and how they met. And I was like, how'd you guys meet? And they're, they've been married for maybe 40 years, and they're staring lovingly into each other's eyes and totally like with their arms around each other and you can tell they're totally in love. And they're like, we met online, and then we went on our first date and started talking, and that was a 3-hour conversation, and we haven't stopped talking since. And they do live independent, interdependent lives. It's not a codependent relationship, but it was one of those magical, kind of Cinderella fantasy. Like, I met him, it was love at first sight, and we're still magically in love. So you just can't, it's like we want to be able to
give a rule book.
Yeah, and to stop ourselves from ever experiencing pain. And that's not exactly how that works. But I do think that if we go through our healing as much as we can when we can do it, whether that's in couplehood or on our own, we all have stuff we need to heal. And so if we're functioning from a place of past trauma, we're always going to end up in the spiral. And why I think it's this idea of finding your own voice is so important to me is that if you can always come back to the core essence of who you are and then express that in some way and stand behind it, then I think you're less likely, I think you're more likely to get out sooner, to unenmesh and recognize that enmeshment is a part of falling in love. It's a part of bonding. It's not the end of bonding. It's a beginning to bonding. And then eventually we have to figure out how that goes and becomes interdependent.
Well, that was going to be my next question. All this being said about how couples go at their own pace and you never really know exactly what's going to work perhaps and what's not, and what's going to be healthy and what's not. What are maybe 2 or 3 things that someone can do when they're in the early stages of a relationship, the honeymoon period, feeling all of the feel goods, wanting to be with the person, exploring a new relationship, and not lose your voice and not lose yourself in the midst of all of this?
Yeah, I think really paying attention to how often do I feel silenced? Okay. You can have disagreements, but you ultimately want to be with a partner who's listening. I mean, having a voice doesn't guarantee that anybody's going to hear what you have to say.
Oh, my goodness. That's beautiful. Profound, I should say.
And so in partnership, the most important thing is that you have a willing partner. So getting in there and assessing how willing is my partner to hear me versus how often is my partner saying, could you get to the point? Or I've heard this before, or
dozing off, looking around,
exactly.
Not validating what you're saying, not being engaged.
Am I really feeling like I can come to the table in my fullest, most complete self and speak through my most authentic voice and have the person receive it, whether or not they agree with it, but at least that they seek to understand.
And that they're interested.
Exactly. And that after I've spoken my truth, they honor it, try to elevate it, amplify it, play a game of yes and. That's one of my biggest things in relationships is, can you play a game of yes and? I don't know if you're familiar with that improv game, but in improvisational theater, there's this idea, there's a game, but it's also a concept of playing a game of yes and. So if you're in an improv scene and you offer something to your improv partner, like, let's pretend this fish is our boat and we're gonna whatever, just something ridiculous, and you're like, that's ridiculous, you're gonna shut down the scene. And so in improv, the basic tenet of improv is you have to play a game of yes and. Whatever your partner throws at you, you say, oh my gosh, yes, and I'm going to add to this. So whatever it is you're going to say, I'm going to not blindly agree with it, but that the whole concept of relationship is a game of yes and to me, if it's going to be healthy. It needs to be a game of, I totally hear what you're saying, and what do you think about this? Or can I amplify it in this way? Or can I support you in that way? And then you have a relationship that ultimately works. But if your partner doesn't seek to understand, you're going to find yourself, again, with possibly micro, possibly macro, but you're going to find yourself in little tiny ways starting to shut down. And that beauty of the enmeshment and the expansion that you feel at the beginning of love, where it feels like little flowers are like all blooming in your heart. And it's like, oh, there another flower just bloomed, another flower just bloomed. Pretty soon you're going to find those flowers shutting down again. And if you start to notice that when I speak, I'm not getting another flower blooming, but rather one is closing, something needs to be done. That needs to be noted and changed.
And you're not flourishing, to go with the flower analogy.
Exactly.
Because some relationships might be or seem functional in many ways, but they may be surface level and they might not be joyous and expansive because the two of you aren't encouraging each other to grow and expand. And I mean, I think a lot of people are happy to stay in relationships where there isn't a lot of joy and passion. And so that's important to look at as well. It's not just, do we never fight? It's how, excited and joyous do I feel about connecting with this?
Or how much myself do I feel? Like, do I feel like myself? And do I feel like my core self? Do I feel like my voice is celebrated? And my voice is that sense of my inner knowing, my wisdom, my intuition, my expression of self. All those things are included within this umbrella of voice. Do I feel that those things are celebrated, accepted? Not everybody's into like joy and passion. Everybody has their different way of being.
Okay, that's me.
Yeah. And so, but the point is, do I feel like more and more and more of myself is being brought out and celebrated versus shut down? And, a friend of mine the other day was saying to me, she has this very loud, very funny laugh. And I was like, just anytime I hear your laugh, it just sets my whole world right. And she said, you're the only person who has ever said that about my laugh. Her husband, from whom she's now divorced, used to shut that down. Used to be like, you're embarrassing me. Your laugh's too loud. It's too much. You're too much. Right. So when I voice, either literally or figuratively, does my partner celebrate that and say, yeah, that's my girl. She's the one with the crazy laugh. Or does your partner say, ooh, could you tone it down? Because you're embarrassing me. So what are the things that are expanding you or opening you? And what are the things that are closing you in or shutting you down? And that's going to look different for everyone.
I'm smiling because I have a very, very loud voice. I'm notorious for it, or maybe just famous for it. I mean, it's followed me my entire life all over the world. For a while, I thought I had people bringing it up constantly because it was some sort of American thing. But I've been in America 5 years now. I still have people tell me they can hear me in the other room, even when I feel like I'm talking quietly. And I put something on Facebook just last week saying, does anybody else have this problem? And, like any advice. And a lot of people were like, you're asking the wrong question. And one of my colleagues really quickly on a call the other day said, I hope that you will never let anybody criticize you for your loud voice again. And then she goes, because it's your trademark. And that meant a lot. So I appreciate you saying that, or bringing up that story. Also, as women, we want to take up less space. And I think that sometimes a woman might be teased or criticized for having a loud voice because she's taking up space and she's calling attention to herself. And you know what? That is fine. So I also really like what you mentioned about the umbrella of what your voice means. I was going to ask you what it means to find your voice, but I think the way you put it was just absolutely perfect. And I'm sure that a lot of people can relate. Nothing shatters your life like a breakup. And the feeling of a broken heart is real. I know that it seems impossible right now, but there is hope and there are ways to heal. I would love to work with you one-on-one to heal your broken heart and put your breakup behind you. My personalized coaching programs are designed to pinpoint what will be most effective in helping you to move forward and make this breakup a part of your past. I believe in you. message me at breakupspodcast@gmail.com or hit me up on Instagram at breakupspodcast, and let's connect about creating a magical plan of action to get this breakup in your rear view mirror. So I think maybe we're to the point of what are some initial ways that a person can begin to rediscover themselves and their voice in the midst of grieving a relationship or in the midst of trying to process some trauma from how things went down in the breakup or just the entire time that you were with this person. I'm a survivor of domestic violence, and I know when I finally left, I was numb. I couldn't feel anything. I had a hard time talking. I had a hard time eating. I was, the classic shell of a person, and maybe not everyone's story is so extreme, but yeah, where would you begin? What are a few tips that you could give on places to start?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously number one is finding some semblance of safety, whether that is physical safety, geographical safety, the safety of a friend, like some start to get a little bit of a sense of safety back. And then I know this is going to sound a little funny, but I think people really underutilize their natural ability to sing. I think people think singing is for professional opera singers. I think people think singing is to be trained, but we all, even if you're not singing in tune, the singing voice is there for you to express what's inside out. I think people really underestimate the power of their own singing voice to heal them. And so whether it's that you're just humming or you're making vowel sounds, just to get the vibration happening in the chest and going out of the body. I often will pick, for some reason, House of the Rising Sun is a song that I often go back to when I'm feeling sad. And I'm just like, I need to get the sadness out of my body. Mm-hmm. And as a trained opera singer, there was absolutely a resistant part of me that's like, if I'm not singing opera and I'm not performing, there's no point in singing. And that took me years to realize, wait a minute, your singing voice is your own, and it's there to express your own soul. Nobody has to hear it and nobody gets to judge it, and it's there for your own healing. So I think people underestimate the power of their own singing to heal them. It will if you really just commit to it and decide you're going to do it.
And it can make you so happy too. I sing a lot at home, and it can help you process grief as well. I've got some songs. One of my favorite is a song called Kalamazoo by the Show Ponies, which describes what it's like to be an intense person who feels a lot. And I think the chorus says, I'd rather feel it all than be numb in my mind. And I put that on when I'm feeling a lot. And I think if you're feeling like you lost your voice after a relationship, hearing it come out of you might be one of the keys or one of the really magical things that you could experience physically to help you know that you're here and it's still you.
100%. And I think also, and this one's a little harder, but important to stay focused on. And that is, like I said before, having a voice doesn't mean anybody's listening or anybody's going to hear you. And so I think what's so important, and I think that's why a lot of people do go to therapy, but I think what's so important is to find that one person who's going to hear you and listen to you. You need to find somebody who, when you speak, and let's say before, that person with whom you were not in a great relationship with or you separated from, let's say they used to shut you down or tell you were stupid or tell you that idea was dumb. If you can find one person who's like, no, wait, that's not true. What you're saying is really interesting. Tell me more. Whoever that person might be, whether it's a mentor or the grocer, I don't care. Anybody who's going to hear you, is going to actually listen to you and say, you know what you're saying actually has meaning and worth. I think that's the number one way to really get your voice back after a breakup is just start having conversations with people who get you and let your voice come out and find the person who's going to say, yeah, I'm with you. Totally. Just so that you can be reaffirmed and feel that resonance again. And that's a big part. I think you and I spoke a little bit about the program that I created, the Soundscapes of the Psyche program I created. So that young woman whose voice I recorded and then I went through that process with her, I ended up kind of cutting up her recording and then sending it back to her to listen to her. And she's a trained opera singer. She records every lesson we've ever done. She's recorded every coaching she's ever done. And she listened to that recording and she said, I feel like that's the first time I've ever heard my voice. So she had never really listened to herself speak in her patterns that were creating so much suffering for her. She'd never really heard herself talk, like she'd never really heard the narrative of her breakup story. And so to have it played back to her, and not just played straight back like she recorded it and then listened to it, but when I've manipulated it and moved it around so that she can hear it as I'm hearing it. Here are the weak spots, here are the strong spots. Here's where your voice really is. Here's who you really are. And she's hearing her own voice back. That really is key. So finding a way, I think one of the most important things is finding a way to not only get others to hear your voice, but figure out, how am I going to hear my own voice? And even if you just pick up your voice memo on your phone, use that app or something and record yourself and then listen to yourself back and make a commitment to listen to yourself back with that same love and acceptance that you want others to listen to you, that can be a helpful thing as well.
Do you like what Soha has to say? Are you curious maybe about how her work can help you rediscover your voice again after a breakup or maybe for the first time? Go and find her on LinkedIn at Soha Al-Jurf. That's SOHAAJURF. She would love to connect with you. You can also find her at sohaaljair.com. That's her website. And you can hit her up directly at sohaaljair@gmail.com. Go to the show notes. I have everything there. Go and at least thank her for her work and for this wonderful interview. These are such great practical tips. I think two things. First of all, when it comes to the voice memos, something that I also might suggest is if you're really that unused to recording yourself and listening, start sending voice memos to your friends. I have gotten really into that the past couple of years. I think some friends think I do it too much, but using your voice to send text to your friends, there is something powerful about it. I feel like it expresses my confidence to everyone I send them to. Sometimes I listen back just to make sure that, whatever I was trying to express got through, but it has really bolstered, like I said, my confidence. And also I know whomever I'm sending them to is going to be listening to my voice. And so I might say, if you've never sent voice memos to your friends, start doing it. It's also kind of fun, I think, to get a voice memo from friends. They don't always send them back. And it's funny, the people who don't and the people who do, I have to say.
I think another huge thing for the voice too is that I think that people assume that if you have a voice, if you're outspoken, if you're confident, that that's just how you come. And I really think that I think a lot of people see me that way, that I just kind of have a confidence. I'm not afraid to speak. I am afraid to speak, and I do it anyway. So I think that, there's nobody I know because of my work, I've worked with people on world stages. I've worked with people who are running countries, companies, you name it. Nobody's unafraid. They just, whatever's on the other side of the thing, the obstacle to them speaking, whatever's on the other side of that, they want more than they want the safety of silencing themselves or being silenced. So I think that's a big part of it too, is recognizing what the thing is that you want or how you want to be in the world, and recognizing that being afraid or embarrassed or anxious or feeling silly is not a reason not to do it, because we all feel silly. We all feel like there's a barrier to entry. I mean, unless you're an extreme extrovert, then, you like being silly.
A little, but
Totally. But if you're somebody who's lost your voice in a relationship, something stopped you from moving forward. And that was probably you felt afraid, or you were speaking, but your voice just wasn't being heard. So getting over the idea that it's supposed to be easy and that it should be simple just to have a voice, it's not. You might be afraid, but you have to practice doing it anyway, and practice in safe environments. Don't just go out to a rally or go, sit at the conference table and try to change the world first. Maybe that's step 10, but start where it's safe, start where it's easy, and then build up.
Yeah, like maybe sending a voice memo to a friend, or just singing along with something at home. And yes, the rewards are great. And one more thing before we wrap up that I thought of when you were talking is all the potential and the opportunity for growth that comes during/after a breakup, or during the recovery of a breakup, or during the quote unquote healing journey. Everybody, I say this all the time. This is a fertile time for personal development, looking at your patterns, changing your life, starting fresh. Please don't take this time for granted. I know that it hurts, and I know that there's a lot of pain involved, and there are a lot of unideal circumstances and things that you never wanted to happen. But what's waiting for you on the other side could change your life if you let it.
100%. And I think, I just turned 50 in September, and I've been through lots of breakups. And yes, when you're in them, it feels like you're dying, and it feels like the world is ending. And there's often nothing anybody can say that's going to make you feel okay in that moment. But if you can hold on to a glimmer of recognizing that at some point, it's all the puzzle pieces are going to come together in a way, like you said, if you let them, where your life will make sense. And you'll understand, and because I'm 50 and I've gone through so many relationships at this point, I've also seen how how former partners' lives have played out.
Oh, okay.
And so that gives me an opportunity to see who they might have married or what life they ended up being in. And I'm like, oh yeah, that relationship wouldn't have made any sense for me.
Good for you.
Yeah. And I think that the longer we live, as long as we keep that little glimmer of someday it's going to be okay, and someday it's going to make sense, and someday this pain will go away. It will. Yes. It'll take a while, but it will. Like the intensity of it will. And then also allowing for the possibility of, what if there's like some guiding force in my life, whether it's my own soul or God or an angel or however you want to look at it? What if there is some guiding force in my life that actually has my back and is guiding me towards something that makes sense for my soul? And this relationship wasn't it. Mm-hmm. And I think that if we can get to that point, sometimes it's just those little glimmers that keep us going to the next step. And then in retrospect is when we see that it was fertile. And we wish in retrospect that we could have enjoyed it more as that fertile time. Mm-hmm. But sometimes we can't see it when we're in it, for sure.
Well, that's why people are looking at podcasts. And that's why I take advantage of every single episode, so I can let people know, yes, this isn't going to last forever, your pain, and definitely take advantage of this time. I am here to help if people want coaching support. Soha is here to help if you'd like to really explore how to rediscover your voice, how to use it either again or for the first time. Go and hit her up on LinkedIn and just have a chat about what it would look like to dive into some of this work and rediscover your voice. I hope that this is something that a lot of people will consider, because you are special, you are interesting, everything that you have to say is valuable, and the world wants to hear it.
Yeah, and I'm happy to do a 30-minute free discovery call if anybody wants to just chat and see if there's something that we can do together that might be helpful.
It sounds like this will completely change your life and how you show up in the world. So yes, everyone go and book a free discovery call. I'll link the LinkedIn in the show notes. Please, please, please. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the gift that you are offering. Thank you for choosing breakups as a little bit of a niche for your work, because like I say, a breakup can either break you or make you. And this is a chance to allow it to make you. And we need more people who are supporting people going through breakups. There's not enough of that in society. So thank you so much.
Right. Like we said, because society is so molded on the being together, and most people have to go through at least one breakup in their lives, and it can be brutal. Mm-hmm. So, but you get through, you do. Yes, you find a way.
Thank you so much. I will see everyone soon. Thank you to everyone who listened. And I am sending you so much strength for the week ahead.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Breakups, Broken Hearts, and Moving On with Janice Formicella. I sincerely hope that you found today's episode inspirational or useful. I would love to support you on your healing journey. All you have to do is send me a message on Instagram at Breakups Podcast, or email me at breakupspodcast@gmail.com, and I will be in touch to get you started. Remember, if you are struggling with a broken heart, your feelings are temporary. I am sending you so much love and luck for the week ahead. You've got this.